On April 15, 1989, thousands of football fans traveled to Sheffield for an FA Cup semi-final. They went to watch a match, a day of hope and passion. For 97 of them, it was their last day. They would never return home. The Hillsborough Stadium was a sea of anticipation, but in the central pens of the Leppings Lane end, a nightmare was unfolding. A catastrophic failure of police crowd control led to a fatal crush. Fans were trapped against steel fences, gasping for air, their chests compressed until they could no longer breathe. While human beings were dying, police stood and watched. The match was stopped, but it was far too late. The green pitch, a field of dreams, became a field of death and makeshift triage. 97 men, women, and children lost their lives, not in an accident, but in a disaster caused by gross negligence. What followed was not just a tragedy, but a calculated, malicious cover-up that would last for decades. In the immediate aftermath, the South Yorkshire Police, the very people responsible for the safety of the fans, began to construct a lie. They systematically blamed the victims. They fabricated stories of drunkenness, of ticketless hooligans storming the gates. Senior officers altered witness statements, deleting any evidence that pointed to their own failures. The government and the establishment closed ranks. Major newspapers fed a stream of police-sanctioned misinformation, printed headlines that were pure poison. The truth, one screamed, followed by a litany of lies. Fans had picked the pockets of the dead. They had urinated on police officers. They had obstructed the rescue efforts. These were not just inaccuracies. They were deliberate smears designed to deflect blame from the powerful and place it on the powerless, the dead, and the grieving. For the families of the 97, the pain of their loss was compounded by the agony of this public defamation. Their loved ones were not just gone. Their memory was being desecrated. The fight for justice became a life's work. For 27 long, grueling years, the families of the Hillsborough victims refused to let the lies stand. They campaigned relentlessly, facing institutional obstruction and public indifference. They were ordinary people forced into an extraordinary battle against the state. Finally, in 2016, an inquest jury delivered a verdict that shattered the official narrative. They ruled that the 97 were unlawfully killed and that the fans were in no way responsible for the disaster. The truth, paid for in tears and decades of struggle, had finally been brought into the light. Hillsborough stands as a chilling testament to how easily a beautiful game can be twisted into a scene of horror, and how institutions will protect themselves even at the cost of human life and basic decency. The shadow of tragedy had fallen on English football before. 4 years earlier, on May 29, 1985, Liverpool was to play Juventus in the European Cup final at the Heysel Stadium in Brussels. The stadium was dilapidated, a disaster waiting to happen. An hour before kickoff, a group of Liverpool supporters breached a flimsy fence separating them from a neutral area largely filled with Juventus fans. In the ensuing panic, the Italian fans retreated against a crumbling perimeter wall. The wall gave way. It collapsed, crushing those below under a cascade of concrete and human bodies. 39 people, mostly Italian, were killed. They were crushed to death before the biggest match of their lives had even begun. In an almost surreal and macabre decision, the authorities decided the match must go on, ostensibly to prevent further violence. While the bodies of the dead were being carried from the stadium laid out under blankets just beyond the pitch, the game was played. Juventus won 1-0. The trophy was lifted, the celebrations muted and hollow. The beautiful game had become a grotesque spectacle, played out in a graveyard. Heysel was a stain on the sport, a night when football souls seemed to die, and a reminder that the arenas built for joy could just as easily become tombs. Sometimes the darkness comes not from the stands, but from the sky. On February 6, 1958, a plane carrying the brilliant young Manchester United team, the Busby Babes, was returning from a European Cup match in Belgrade. After a refueling stop in a snow-covered Munich, the plane attempted to take off. Twice, it failed. On the third attempt, it crashed through a fence at the end of the runway and burst into flames. The dream turned into a fiery nightmare. 23 people were killed, including 8 of the most gifted players of their generation. Duncan Edwards, Roger Byrne, Tommy Taylor, names that promised a dynasty were suddenly just names on a list of the dead. The Busby Babes were gone. An entire generation of English footballing genius wiped out in an instant. The manager, Matt Busby, was read his last rites twice, but miraculously survived to rebuild the team. Yet the ghosts of Munich would forever haunt the club and English football, a permanent scar representing the fragility of life and the cruelest twists of fate. This was not the first time a team had been erased from existence. On May 4, 1949, the Italian champions, Grande Torino, were flying home from a friendly in Lisbon. They were the greatest team in Italian history, the backbone of the national side, poised for years of dominance. As their plane approached the city of Turin, it was enveloped in thick fog. The pilot, disoriented, descended too early. The aircraft slammed into the retaining wall of the Basilica of Superga, which sits atop a hill overlooking the city. The plane was obliterated on impact. All 31 people on board were killed. An entire team, its coaches and journalists, were gone. The greatest dynasty in Italian football was instantly erased. Italy had lost its heroes, and the world of football had lost one of its brightest lights. The news sent a shockwave of grief across the nation and the sport. The remains of the plane and the wreckage of a legendary team became a symbol of a promise unfulfilled, a story of greatness cut short in the most brutal way imaginable. The darkness in football can also be deeply personal, a singular act of violence that exposes the ugliest passions the sport can ignite. At the 1994 World Cup in the United States, Colombian defender Andrés Escobar scored an own goal in a crucial match against the host nation. It was a simple mistake, a moment of misfortune that can happen to any player. But in the hyper-pressurized world of Colombian football, entangled with powerful drug cartels and illegal betting syndicates, it was a mistake that signed his death warrant. Colombia was eliminated from the tournament. 10 days later, back home in Medellin, Escobar was confronted outside a nightclub. A group of men argued with him, taunting him about his mistake. Then, one of them pulled out a gun. Escobar was shot 6 times. With each bullet that entered his body, the killer reportedly shouted, "Gol! Gol!" He was murdered for an error on a football pitch. His death revealed the sinister underbelly of the sport, where the line between passion and pathology, between the game and life itself, had been violently erased. The sport has even been the spark for war. In 1969, tensions between the neighboring Central American nations of El Salvador and Honduras were already high due to land disputes and immigration issues. Then came a 3-game World Cup qualifying series between the two countries. The matches became a focal point for rabid nationalism. There was rioting, violence, and attacks on immigrant communities in both nations. The final playoff match, won by El Salvador, was the final trigger. On July 14, 1969, just 4 days after the game, the Salvadoran army launched an invasion of Honduras. The conflict that followed became known as the La Guerra del Fútbol, the Football War. It lasted for 100 hours. By the time a ceasefire was brokered, an estimated 3,000 people were dead. Thousands more were displaced. A simple series of football matches had ignited a conflict that killed thousands and left deep wounds that would take decades to heal. The world's most popular sport had become a catalyst for organized, state-sanctioned slaughter. The beautiful game has an ugly history, a history of negligence, of cover-ups, of violence and death. It's a history of stadiums turned into tombs, of heroes lost in an instant, and of passions so intense they lead to murder and war. These are the stories buried beneath the spectacle of triumph and glory. These are the stories they want you to forget.